She shouldn't have gone back to that place. Clara had disappeared there years ago, and everyone knew the lake was dangerous. But when the screams echoed through the forest and the shadows began to shift, it became clear the lake wanted more than answers. It wanted another victim, and she was exactly where it needed her to be.
The decision to return to the Lake of Screams came on a sleepless night. Sitting at the edge of my bed, staring at the picture of my sister Clara, the same thought hammered in my mind: no one disappears without leaving a trace. Even though the police had closed the case and everyone in town whispered that she was just another victim of the lake, I knew I couldn't give up on her. I needed to know what really happened that night. The road to the lake was a mix of memories and chills. The tree branches formed a tunnel over the dirt road, blocking almost all the sunlight. Shadows danced along the sides of the car, and I felt a coldness that had nothing to do with the approaching winter. The radio was off, yet the silence seemed to scream. When I parked the car at the entrance of the trail leading to the lake, I took a deep breath before stepping out. The air there felt heavier, laden with moisture and something I couldn't identify. It was as if the place itself was watching me, evaluating my presence. The last time I had been here was during the search for Clara. I had been just a shadow of myself, clinging to any hope the volunteers offered me. Now, I was alone. The trail to the lake was narrow and poorly maintained, as if the trees themselves were trying to hide the path from anyone daring to approach. As I walked, the sounds of the forest seemed amplified: the crunch of branches underfoot, the rustling of leaves in the wind, and, occasionally, something else. A distant sound, like a muffled moan. I stopped several times, trying to convince myself it was just the wind, but my heart didn't believe it. When I finally reached the edge of the lake, the sight hit me like a punch. The water was black, so dark it seemed to absorb the light from the sky. The surface was smooth, untouched, like a dark mirror. It was hard to imagine that something so serene could hide so much tragedy. I knew that beneath those waters lay secrets no one dared to uncover. I sat on the old wooden dock, now worn by time. I closed my eyes and tried to connect with Clara. I remembered the last time she had been there, laughing while taking pictures with her friends. My heart tightened as I imagined what might have happened. That's when I heard it for the first time. It was a low sound, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. A scream. It seemed to come from within the water, carried by the wind to my ears. I jumped to my feet, my eyes desperately searching for the source. But the lake remained still, as if mocking me. "Clara?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The answer came in the form of another scream, closer this time, more real. My skin prickled, and a wave of fear swept over me. I wanted to run, to go back to the car and leave that place forever. But something inside me, perhaps desperation or love for my sister, forced me to stay. As night fell, the shadows around the lake seemed to move, almost dancing to the sound of the screams that now echoed more frequently. I knew I was being watched. It wasn't paranoia, there was something there, hidden in the darkness, waiting. Suddenly, something broke the surface of the water. It wasn't big, but enough to cause small ripples that quickly disappeared. I held my breath, hoping to see some rational explanation, but nothing happened. This was just the beginning, but I knew the lake hadn't forgotten me. And if I wanted to discover the truth about Clara, I would have to face much more than simple legends. The echoes of the lake. That night, I couldn't bring myself to leave. Something about the lake had anchored me there, as if its dark waters whispered promises of answers I wasn't ready to hear. I set up a small camp by the edge of the dock, though I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The wind carried faint whispers, and every rustle of the leaves felt like a breath against my neck. I kept my flashlight close, its weak beam a poor defense against the encroaching shadows. As the hours dragged on, the temperature plummeted. The air grew colder, damp with an unnatural chill that clung to my skin. I sat by the fire I had managed to start, staring at the lake. It was mesmerizing in its stillness, like a void consuming everything around it. Yet, that silence was deceptive. Beneath its calm surface, I could feel something stirring. Around midnight, the screams began again. This time, they were sharper, more distinct. They didn't come from any specific direction. They seemed to echo from everywhere, reverberating off the trees and the water. My hands trembled as I turned toward the sound. It wasn't human. No voice should sound like that. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice barely steady. The only response was a long, drawn-out wail, like the lake itself was crying out. I gripped my flashlight tighter, its beam shaking as I swept it over the area. Nothing moved, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, hidden just beyond the reach of the light. I decided to follow the sound. It wasn't rational, but staying still felt worse. My boots crunched against the damp ground as I walked along the shoreline, the beam of my flashlight bouncing across the terrain. The screams grew louder with each step, guiding me like a morbid beacon. That's when I saw it, a faint light flickering in the distance, near the opposite end of the lake. It was too steady to be a reflection and too dim to be a fire. My heart pounded as I made my way toward it, every step heavier than the last. The light seemed to pulse, almost like it was breathing, and as I got closer, I could see that it was coming from the water itself. I stopped at the edge, my boots sinking slightly into the muddy ground. The light shimmered beneath the surface, pale and eerie, like a trapped soul trying to break free. Without thinking, I knelt down, reaching out toward the glow. The water was freezing, and the shock of it made me gasp. But I couldn't pull my hand away. It felt as though the light was pulling me in, urging me closer. Then, I heard her. Clara's voice. "Helena." It was soft, barely more than a whisper, but unmistakable. My breath hitched, and tears welled up in my eyes. "Clara? Is that you?" I leaned closer to the water, desperation overcoming fear. The light flickered again, and her voice echoed once more. "Help me." My hand plunged deeper into the water, searching for something, anything, that could connect me to her. But the moment my fingers brushed against something solid, the light vanished, and the screams returned, louder than ever. They surrounded me, a cacophony of anguish that made my head throb. I stumbled back, falling onto the cold, wet ground. The lake rippled violently now, its surface no longer calm. Shapes began to emerge, dark figures rising from the depths. Their features were indistinct, their forms shifting like shadows in water, but their eyes glowed with the same pale light I had seen before. Paralyzed with fear, I could only watch as they moved closer, their bodies gliding across the water's surface. They didn't speak, but their presence screamed louder than any sound I'd heard that night. I scrambled to my feet, my instinct screaming at me to run. But before I could move, one of the figures raised an arm, pointing directly at me. The screams stopped abruptly, leaving a deafening silence in their wake. My chest heaved as I tried to steady my breathing, but my legs wouldn't obey. And then, in that oppressive silence, I heard Clara's voice again, clearer this time, and filled with terror. "Run, Helena." I didn't need to be told twice. Revelations of the abyss. The run through the forest felt like it lasted an eternity. My feet stumbled over exposed roots, and branches scratched my face as if trying to hold me back. Behind me, the screams had returned, louder and more ferocious, like something was hunting me. The sound made my heart pound in my chest. Each step I took seemed to echo in the darkness, a reminder that there was nowhere to hide. Somehow, I managed to reach the trail that led to my car. The sight of the vehicle gave me a fleeting moment of hope, but as soon as I reached out to open the door, it wouldn't budge. The lock was jammed. Panicked, I began yanking on the handle with all my strength, my eyes constantly darting back to the trail behind me. The shadows moved, closing in, until I finally managed to open the door and threw myself inside. I turned the key in the ignition, but the engine didn't respond. I tried again and again, each failed attempt heightening my terror. The silence outside was more terrifying than the earlier screams. It was as if the very air around me had been stilled, waiting for something to happen. When the engine finally roared to life, the sense of relief was short-lived. In the rearview mirror, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The figures were there, standing still on the trail, but they didn't look defeated. Their eyes glowed intensely, watching me leave. But there was something else. Among them, I saw Clara. I slammed on the brakes, unable to believe what I was seeing. She was pale, her hair wet as if she had just emerged from a lake. Her eyes, though human, seemed to reflect the same pale light as the other figures. She didn't speak, but her lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear. Without thinking, I got out of the car. "Clara," I shouted, tears mixing with the cold night air. She didn't move, only raised her hand, pointing back toward the lake. My heart clenched. "You want me to go back?" The slight nod of her head was almost imperceptible, but it was clear. Yes. I knew it was insane, but I couldn't ignore her. Something in her expression, a mix of fear and pleading, pulled me back. Grabbing my flashlight, I began walking toward the lake again. Every step felt heavier than the last, but I couldn't stop. When I reached the shore, the lake was different. The water, once still, now rippled gently, emitting a strange glow. The figures that had pursued me earlier were scattered along the shore, like silent sentinels. In the center of the lake, I saw the glow again, brighter, pulsing like a heartbeat. "Clara?" My voice barely came out, smothered by the oppressive weight of the atmosphere around me. Her figure appeared again, this time closer, standing on the water as if it were solid. Her face was familiar, but something about her was wrong, distorted. She pointed toward the center of the lake, and before I could hesitate, I felt the ground beneath my feet give way. The mud opened as if it were alive, pulling me in. I fought to free myself, but it was useless. My legs were swallowed by the wet earth, and in an instant, I was dragged into the depths of the lake. The darkness around me was absolute, the silence suffocating. Yet, I wasn't alone. Cold hands touched me, pulling me deeper. Voices whispered around me, incomprehensible words forming a chorus. I couldn't tell if Clara was among them, but the voices were filled with pain. Suddenly, the light reappeared. It illuminated a space at the bottom of the lake, revealing a circle of figures standing still, their glowing eyes fixed on me. In the center of them was Clara, her expression calmer now, but still tinged with sadness. She extended her hand toward me, and without thinking, I grabbed it. It was like touching pure ice. Images flooded my mind, Clara being dragged into the lake, her desperate attempts to fight the shadowy figures, until she eventually became one of them. Now, she was trapped, just like the others, and I was next. With a desperate effort, I let go of her hand and swam toward the surface, my body screaming for air. I don't know how I managed it, but when I finally emerged, the night was silent again. The lake was calm, as if nothing had happened. I looked back, expecting to see her, but Clara was gone. All that remained was the reflection of the sky on the lake's black mirror. But I knew she was still there, along with the others. Trapped. And I knew that, sooner or later, the lake would call me back.